Thank you. Thank you. Today I'm going to present to you my work. It's part of Quasi-Crystalline Symmetries in Ancient Islamic Patterns. Just to give you a little bit about my background, involvement in patterns. I was involved early on in my career. I was involved in reconstruction of the minbar of Saladin in Al-Aqsa Mosque. And if you know anything about it, this minbar basically was commissioned by Nuruddin Zinki. When finished, it was constructed in Aleppo, Syria, and it's one finished in 1168. Actually, it stayed in Aleppo in the Great Mosque for 20 years before it was moved to Jerusalem, because the basic idea of it is to be constructed until Jerusalem is back. So Salah ad-Din when he opened Jerusalem back, brought it back, he took it to Al-Aqsa Mosque. And it stayed there for almost 800 years until in 1969, when a firebomb exploded in Al-Aqsa Mosque and burned most of it. So only a few fragments survived, a little bit of the door and a little bit of the muqarnas on the top, but most of it was burned. Now, when I started working, actually it was an international competition, and we worked with those images. We had the only images in the Library of Congress in the US, so those are the images that we used. It has almost 26 different patterns, and the process took a few years, of course, but we analyzed all the patterns, reconstructed the patterns. We actually, based on this, because we had a grant from the late King Hussein to reconstruct it physically. That started with the Islamic Art Institute in Jordan. And just to give you a little bit about what we did, is basically, I'm going to explain each of these patterns. We analyzed those patterns. We went back to defining the basic geometry. And Jay Bonner yesterday explained the polygon in contact principle or method, and I usually use this. So we analyzed each one of these geometries, going down to the basic pattern, and then we analyzed what I call the repeated unit or the seed unit. Basically, each one of these are installed on one of these polygons, and then it grows from there, connecting. So this is just a quick kind of demonstration of how one of the patterns constructed. This is another one. So this is 12-fold, 10-fold. This is a 10-fold. Now, this is important because this is going to take us later to how quasi-crystalline geometry or quasi-periodic geometry in Islamic patterns work. So based on this, you have the basic units, the basic grid pattern of polygons, and you have the repeat unit or the seed unit. We come to that later. These are just more details. Actually, the member was not just geometry. You have the arabesque, the calligraphy. So we worked with the team for reconstructing, getting the calligraphy and the arabesque. But basically, these are just examples of the final work. And we analyze all the wooden pieces. Actually, the minbar is constructed completely without any glue or nails, only wooden nails with the main structure. So it was only kind of interlocking system. It's a very complicated one. So each of these patterns actually interlock completely without any glue. So that was the challenge, to go back and analyze each one of these and figure out how the structure actually works and doesn't fall. It survived 800 years because it was allowed to breathe. If you have any glue in there, probably that will add to deterioration because you have to let it breathe. It's a natural material. So this is just from there, I went to the States. I got my PhD also in patterns, but more about pattern recognition. So it's part of preserving these artifacts because a lot of them actually deteriorated, and sometimes you only have partial pieces. So my work from there, it's basically what we call photogrammetry, getting measurements out of photographs. So specifically, my contribution was taking images of these patterns periodic patterns. Basically, at that point, I was just working periodic patterns, and then analyze and basically, I wrote not a software, it's just a code that read it, reconstruct it, and then it produces the final drawings. Now, today's talk is about quasi-periodic tiling theories, or theories in general, and discovery of it, and how it's related to Islamic geometry. Now, the emergence of quasi-periodic tiling theories have recently emerged as a new paradigm for design creativity and innovation, in which these patterns have been used for design. Artists, architects actually trying to understand their qualities and see if they can use it. These are just two examples quickly put. This is actually not quasi-periodic, but this is one of the recent projects that actually use geometry and self-similarity. They're basically dissecting the geometry down more based on a certain system. And this is Abu Dhabi, the Louvre in Abu Dhabi. It's still in prototyping. I think it hasn't been constructed, but they're trying to see if they can basically enhance the structure of performance using this kind of grid. If you go to Melbourne, if you go down to Melbourne, actually there's more than one project that started using Penrose and other tiling properties, deflation, inflation, self-similarity. And this is the story hole. And you see that's using basically three-dimensional, trying to produce a three-dimensional manipulation of that. Now, to understand how this thing about quasi-periodic, quasi-crystals came about and how it's related to Islamic patterns, I think it's important to go back to 1982, the morning of August 1982. This scientist, Danny Shipman, he was working on a metal. He was melting. He was in his lab. He's a chemist. He was melting aluminum and manganese and then cooling it rapidly. He was expecting that if you cool the metal rapidly, it should distort the atoms. So he shouldn't see an ordered system. But to his surprise, he saw this kind of image. And this is what we call a diffraction pattern, that you actually think about projecting kind of a light on the crystal, and it will reflect that light. And then you see this image. And he was kind of puzzled that this doesn't look distorted. It actually has a central point. Oops. Has a central point, and then he kept counting the kind of the points, and he kept coming with 10. And I attended one of his lectures, and he said, I started counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's 10. No way. Because at that point, crystal cannot exist with 10-fold symmetry. So he thought he must had made a mistake or something. He counted again. He came up with the same thing. He ran to the corridor to see if anyone out there so he can bring him and see it, but he couldn't find anyone. He tried to convince his group that this is actually something new. Of course, they did not believe him, and actually they cast him out. I remember he putting an image of a cat walking in front of like a 10 dogs watching him. So he was saying that I felt like that. I felt like a cat with everyone is basically against me. Now, of course, he tried to publish his first paper, and it took 2 years. And actually, it's very abbreviated paper about his discovery, because he get rejections. And in 10 years after that, they changed the definition of crystallography. They changed it to be more open-ended, that before it was only based on periodic system. Now they found out hundreds of those materials, all of them are metallic. Of course, 2011, he won the Nobel Prize. I was fortunate to meet him last year in Australia, and he attended actually my lecture, and he's very excited about the connection between the two. Now, to understand crystal, inside a crystal, atoms are ordered in a repeated unit. So in this case, depending on the type of the chemical composition, you have different symmetries. So until that point, threefold, so you can fill the plane with threefold, just basically adding triangles. And in this case, all the atoms are at this intersection. They're very ordered. The same thing with fourfold, same thing with sixfold. Now, if you look at any symmetry, 5 or beyond 6, it doesn't work, because you cannot fill the plane just with that polygon. If you look at 5-fold symmetry, actually I see those gaps, and this is it's actually they used to prove that cannot exist at a crystal. So how is this structure, new structure, the used materials actually constructed? If you look at this image, this is basically just a real material under the microscope. And I was just talking to Professor Emil Makofiki, and it's saying that this is actually, it might be five-fold, but it might be a twinning system. So it's not sure that this is quasi-crystalline on the top, just to enforce that. This one? Yeah. Yes, so this is a good one. It's in consideration. But anyway, if you look at the patterns underneath, if you look, it's a very beautiful pattern. This is under the microscope. If you kind of look at the geometry, it has a very specific geometry. Actually, if you abstract it, you think this is Islamic patterns. Now, if you look deeper, you'll see those repeated units. There's certain units that are actually repeated, but in a way, they're not ordered the way we think. You cannot just copy a piece and shift it and paste it. So the challenge from there, what kind of a system is this, and how can we understand it? Because it's important to understand if you want to grow more material, if you want to manipulate it, and use it. So the challenge from that, basically almost 30 years ago, is where is what you call the long-range order of this material. It has a close-range order, so you can see there is some kind of order, but then can you use this to predict the global empire infinitely? How would you use this space to infinitely fill the plane? And that was the challenge, because you cannot copy and paste. Now, the answer to that came actually, well, the beginning of the answer came before the discovery of materials. Mathematicians like to play with puzzles. And they have this challenge, if we can, with using certain set of type of tiles, of shapes, is it possible to basically map or tile the plane without repeating the same formation? And that was just an abstract challenge. It's kind of a puzzle. And I think the first one who got it is American mathematician in the 60s, who had to use 50,000 different pieces. So it's just too much. Now, in the 70s, a mathematician by the name Roger Penrose, a British math professor, he came up with a very elegant way of resolving the puzzle. He proposed these two tiles, and these are two tiles. These are just colored up, and these are based on golden rule, and the thin rhomba and the thick rhomba. And he came with matching rules, that if you use those matching rules and try arranging the pattern, the tile, you can actually come up with, you can, well, by theory, well, they've proven that you can actually fill the plane infinitely if you follow those rules. Now, those rules, if you look at these kind of decoration, these basically guide you to follow those rules, but it's a very complicated. I tried to do it by hand. I could not go beyond a small patch, and then you'll make a mistake. But we have software that actually does that. But it's a nice puzzle, and I play with my students, trying to see if they can figure it out. Now, another way also to construct big patches of pattern is what we call the deflation-inflation rule. That actually you can get one tile and dissect it based on certain geometry, and then that will produce kind of the smaller scale of the same pattern, and the difference is the golden proportion. So if we start with a discrete patch, basically a number of tiles, dissect it down, this agreeing that this is basically get a smaller scale of the same shape. This is the diffraction, the fractal quality of it. Now, if we dissect the green one based on the same rule, you get a bigger patch, or dissect a smaller scale. And so you keep doing this until you get a big patch of those patterns. But this is still discrete, because you actually start with discrete. But this is, you can prove that actually it can fill the plane infinitely, and will never repeat its formation. Now, there are other ways to do it. One way is using a man bars. You actually, in this case, if you had Fibonacci series, if these bars are arranged according to Fibonacci, I don't know how many knows what's Fibonacci if you're not mathematician, architects. Do you know what Fibonacci is? Yes. Okay, so if you draw a grid, basically, and rotate it you have 5 copies, rotate it based on the 5-fold, and unique guide of some kind of a matching rule, also you'll be able to construct or at least define the basic geometry. Another way that mathematicians like to play with is the cut and project method. This is a very abstract method. And they prove that if they, well, actually, they prove that, that Penrose can be constructed using two-dimensional projection of five-fold dimensional hypercubic structure. And we human, we cannot, visualize what's 5 or 4 or anything beyond 3. So visually, you cannot really figure it out. But I once asked a mathematician, he said the trick is not to visualize it. It's just an abstract way. So they have their mathematics that can resolve it. But to explain the principle, if we look at this grid, and this is a two-dimensional repeated grid. And if we project that, basically if we draw a slice with irrational slope. Irrational slope means that this angle in here is actually the golden proportion. And project all the points captured within that, the thickness of this is actually the thickness of the grid of this slice. If we project all the points that captured within that slice to one line, which is one-dimensional, you're actually getting, large, small, large size. You're getting Fibonacci's here, which is a one-dimensional aperiodic system. It is the only one-dimensional aperiodic system we know as in nature. So this is kind of in principle what they use. Now, even with all this method, they contribute tremendously understanding the structure. But still, is there other methods that might be more globally, or we can figure out maybe a system that we can use to construct new quasi-periodic, quasi-crystal system? So that was the challenge. And the answer, I think, at least from my part, came from ancient patterns. And scientists and mathematicians and actually found these array of patterns that actually follow some of them follow completely as quasi-periodic, some of them partially, but they have a system. This is tenfold, and these are basically from Iran to Morocco, or eightfold also. Eightfold was found to some of these patterns to follow some kind of quasi-periodic geometry. We're going to go in detail into explaining those. But if you look at it, again, it's kind of look random, but it has a system. So also recently, Emil Makovicki found basically the first 12-fold in Fez. I was in Fez a year ago looking for this pattern, but unfortunately the building was under renovation, so I was not able to see it. So now we have this array of patterns, and of course more and more patterns actually start to appear. So scientists, artists, and mathematicians start to analyze them. And of course the first one who actually worked on this is also Emil Makovicki. We're lucky to have him here in the conference. The first actually 3 publications from 2000 in 1992 to 1998, he basically was the leader in analyzing this and comparing it to Penrose. J. Bonner also added work with self-similarity of these patterns, especially in the 14th and 15th century. And of course, in 2007, the famous paper by Peter Lou and Steinhardt, and which got a lot of publicity because it was published in Science, and I think a lot of the credit should go back to Makovicki and Jay. Now, recently, again, the last one is Makovicki analyzing the 12-fold pattern. Now, how I came to know this, now, of course, I've been working with patterns, geometric pattern, repeated one. Significant time in my life. When I was listening to NPR, and they mentioned something about patterns and geometry and this new material. So I went and got the paper and started reading it. And the way I think about constructing pattern is based on the polygon. So I always think about a circle, kind of a more global system. And that was my first time looking at the paper. And I had some reservation the way that it was concluded its argument, and that's its concluded argument that it's basically these patterns were done combining a special set of styling with self-similarity. So I started just playing with this, analyzing it. It took me 2 years to publish my first paper, and it was published in Philosophical magazine, so it's more in physics rather than math. And And this is proposes a new way of constructing quasi-periodic, quasi-crystal system. So these are just examples of these patterns. We'll go over in more detail. But my system actually assumed that with a compass, a straight edge, you don't have to have any complicated mathematics. It's just a simple way. It's a self-proportional way that I think ancient people just figured it out, because if you work with a compass and a straight edge for so long, you're bound to basically find those lengths. And just to go back to the principle of polygon in contact, and this is my favorite method. I'm more comfortable using this method. I think it's more universal, at least from my point of view. And it's very easy. You don't have to do calculation. You don't have to do computation. So basically, if you start with any polygon formation, in this case, this is tenfold. And the way I think about it is the regular polygon are the main polygon. And anything in between are basically the connecting formation. So there's kind of hierarchy the way you think about it. And if you have what we call the repeat unit, or think about the seed unit. And the seed unit, in this case, you can have any kind of design. In this case, it's a very simple design. Yes, you're connecting the midpoint of the main side. That's a very simple one. And if you plant the seed unit within the basic grid, just copy it, okay? And then think about it as it's a seed, and it has to grow. And think about how the trees branches out and connect. So anything in between is actually just a connecting. And the connection formation can take different formation depending on the artist. So it's really up to you to manipulate that. But think about how with that. So of course, the basic grid is the hidden system. It's not shown. Now, also the connecting formation can take different designs. This is just examples of how you can actually change these connection formation. This is another example. We have the same basic grid, and just change the design of the seed unit. So if you implant it again, you get a different connecting formation. So based on this, the trick in resolving the symmetry is not the seed unit, because it's controlled the design. It's actually the basic grid. So from that principle, I started working, analyzing the different ancient patterns. Now, if we start with this is Darb al-Imam Shrine in Asfahan. And this is in all is not quasi-periodic. Basically, the cartwheel unit is a quasi-periodic. I'm going to just analyze that because just a clear example. And then see if we can actually grow that cartwheel infinitely and see if we can build it. So if you analyze this, actually you have those lines that help you, guide you through the construction. These are kind of gave me some clues. So this is just a rendering. This is the central cartwheel unit. So if you analyze this, you see that it's part of decagon. So it's tenfold. Okay, it's very nicely put. So think about the midpoint of all kind of the central rotational symmetry. Now, if you do this, if you have basically connect the sides, skip 2, and connect to the other side, you get with kind of a network or a decagram. And this will produce a smaller scale decagon. If you do the same thing with the next one, it's just follows also the same rules, basically. Just skip to connect 1. And this is the way that actually we use to do the seed unit or the design of the stars. So if you continue, you get a smaller one. If you continue doing this, it's really up to you. You can go as small as you want. Now, the artist did this. It's very easy to do it with just a straight edge, not even a ruler. A ruler indicated there's measurement. In this case, there's no measurement. It's just a combination of circles. The basic grid is constructed with a combination of circles. Now, in this case, if you look at it, it's a very nicely kind of proportion diminishing or network of decagrams. Now, look at these intersection point. They correspond with the center point of what? Of the star unit or the seed unit. Now, the trick is actually, but then how would you define the size of that star unit? Because you cannot just arbitrarily draw one. It's actually the exact one that you produce at the end. So the network actually produced the size of that unit, and it's exactly proportionate to the whole system. So the minute you lock it in place based on this grid, it exactly takes its place. So if we analyze this grid, this is Fibonacci system. If you analyze, basically, if you divide the bigger radius on a smaller radius, it it's actually the golden proportion. So by just simple, basic geometry, you clock all the geometry. It's very well relational. So now, if to use this basic, now in my system, it's based on multi-level hierarchy. So the cartwheel is a first hierarchy, then we use that to the next hierarchy. So those hierarchy can be infinite. So for the quasi-periodic system, actually the basic grid is this system. It's not the polygon grid. It's this kind of proportional system, which is the same system you use to build stars. So kind of, it's pretty much following the same logic. Now, just to understand how we can construct that ancient patterns, we start with the basic grid. And this is just the Fibonacci analysis. And we have the seed unit, the same design we did with the periodic. Now, if you put the seed unit in those intersection points, just click in the seed unit with that size, you get with this formation where actually the edges clicks exactly in place because it's very well proportioned. Now, the connective formation, remember, the seed, then it's like a tree grows and interlock. And these connective formation can take different ways. For the Darb al-Imam shrine, actually, the connecting formation was overlapping of the seed unit. There's a play with arrangement, but this is their way of doing it. Now, this is just to show the overlapping. Now, if you put it in place, you get the first cartwheel. Now, of course, it was rendered as tiled. So this is the first cartwheel pattern, completely quasi-crystal, quasi-periodic. Now, the trick is, okay, how can we grow it? Because, okay, we can copy this next to it, and that's what the whole pattern, but then we would not get quasi-periodic. So the trick is very, very easy. Now, for the first hierarchy, we actually consider this as a seed unit. For the next hierarchy, this now is a seed unit for the larger system. So we actually start with a new generation of the network. And in the center, you see this is the finally constructed one, the previous level. And just click it in place and use the same rules that you use. I mean, you can manipulate it the way you want. These are exactly following those rules. We're not going to go into the details of them. But you come up with this. It's exactly interlock in place. Everything that's a very simple and easy way. If you want to grow it even further, you use this as your seed unit to grow the bigger one. So if you analyze kind of one axis of the system, you can use 2 units. These are the 2 based on the Fibonacci system. So it's completely proportionate. Also, if you compare the decagram network with the diffraction pattern, see it's completely locked in place. It's exactly how it's constructed. Now, let's see if we can use the same thing to do Penrose. Now, what's interesting is the same network we're using for Darb al-Imam is the same one we use for Penrose. So Penrose starts with a basic grid. In this case, the seed unit is actually this design. It's a very simple design. In this case, you have this seed unit, and you have kind of another rotational symmetry, which is part of the seed unit. That's part of connective formation. So if you click those in place, you got this kind of geometry. Now, the connecting formation in Penrose is actually part of the seed unit. Those are taking part of the seed unit. If you follow certain rules and connect it, you come up with the first hierarchy. Now, to grow the second hierarchy, you actually build a new generation of the network. You put these are the 2 units, and the connecting formation is part of that, and you build it. If you want to go to the higher level, you basically follow the same rule. You have to stick to exactly the same way to follow it. Now, let's take one example. Another example is actually some of you are interested in. Let's see if we can, of course, this was proven by Emil Makovsky that this is quasi-periodic. If we analyze it based on the same system, okay, so this is basically just one side. We use the exact same network that used Penrose and Darb al-Imam. In this case, we see the seed units, you can manipulate that because that doesn't affect the symmetry. So you can have so many variations. Just simply by changing the design of that seed unit, you come up with many, many variations of quasi-periodic. So in this case, the artist or whoever designed it or the mathematician decided that these are two units I'm going to use. So you can use either or. You can use each one a different unit, different design, as long as you keep the outside boundary as decagram or tenfold, as part of tenfold. These are the connective formation or the growths. Think about it. It's again, in this case, it's kind of partial. Extending the star or the seed unit, just extend those lines and see how it meets. So if you float it in place, and this is the central mostly is use this unit, and on the edges the other unit was used. So put this in place exactly, that's Penrose. This is just to show how the connecting formations are done based on these rules. And this is the Cartwheel. So this proves that this part, the units on the tower actually quasi-periodic based on the first hierarchy. Now if you want to grow it even further, you want to build a second hierarchy, you simply follow the same rules. You build a new generation of the network, you put it in place, follow the same guidelines, you come up with a second hierarchy. To do the third hierarchy, it's also, you use this as the base to grow. So it's a very simple system. Now let's see Octagon Base. Now, of course, Emil was also the first one who figured out that there's Octagon Base quasi-periodic geometry in Islamic architecture. And for example, let's take this example. This is the quasi-periodic panel from Patio Virgin in Alcazar in Sevilla. If we look, remember that we're looking for the rotational points of rotational symmetry. Those are the keys. Even when you analyze any pattern, you have to look for that to define the basic grid. In this case, look at this. So this is what the basic grid just by analyzing this pattern. So each of those points are actually connect to the formation. So even the basic grid is a star, inflated star. And these, if you analyze this is easy constructed with a compass and a straight edge, of course. And if you kind of analyze that, it's everything, of course. These are we're not going to go detail on this, but it's based on root 2, of course. Now, we use this as the basic grid. So this is a basic grid we just constructed. This is, in this case, the repeat unit, which is a very simple one. If you put it in place, you come up with this geometry. Now, connecting formation, these are the connecting formations. It's simply extending the line of the seed unit. Again, think about the seed unit as growing and meeting the other trees. You come up with this. And you can manipulate the seed unit, the connecting formation, to come up with different designs. Now, this is rendered. This is the final one. Now, to grow, this is the first hierarchy. Now, if you want to grow to the second hierarchy, you're actually going to use this as the seed unit for the next level. So you start with a bigger one. The seed unit's already in there. You click it in place. And if you see, it's actually defined very nice octagon in between. So these octagons, again, in this case, this is the element of it. Actually, it's kind of part of the main unit. And if you put those in place, you come up with the geometry. Now you can extend this even more. So there's no limit. If you have a powerful computer, you can do whatever you want. And these are constructed just by drawing, drafting. There's no computation involved in these ones. Okay, so it's a simple drafting program would do it for you. This is just to show that the pattern's actually part of the second level hierarchy. You can see it clicks exactly in place. Another pattern, I have to hurry up. This is another one. This is a panel from Hall of Ambassadors in Alhambra. This is have a different. This is again we're following. If you look at it, you think it's actually there's a kind of a like. Orthogonal symmetry in there because of those designs, right? But if you analyze it, just we're mapping the center points, remember. You come up with this And remember that the size of the central unit is proportional to the whole system, or it's not going to work. Now, this is the basic grid. Why this is important? Because this is the exact basic grid used for a man quasi-periodic tiling, the octagonal tiling. So in this case, this is, if you analyze it, this is root 2 plus 1. And so if you use this, we start with a basic grid. This is the seed unit. It's a very simple seed unit. This is just the process for constructing the seed unit. You put it in place. In this case, you have some overlapping ones. Actually, this is the artist's choice to add a kind of an octagon. It's a secondary. And he basically manipulated that intersection. He deleted some lines. This is to show that actually connect information can take different forms. You can actually manipulate those connect information. So whatever one, any one of these can work. So, and these are examples of the first hierarchy, changing just the connect information. And this is in the center is the one that the artist used. Now to grow the second hierarchy, simply do this, the same thing. You build a new generation, follow the exact rules that you follow the same one. You plug in place, it's very nicely working. This is just to show that that pattern is exactly part of this. Now this exact one, this is just to show how a kind of close-up looking at the lines exactly fits. Now let's go to a man being a quasi-periodic octagonal tiling, because it's actually you can use the same network to construct this infinitely. Now, a man, again, he's not a mathematician, he's not an architect, he's a postman, has so much time on his hand that he was playing with pattern, and he came up with this. And actually, it was proven that it's quasi-periodic after he died, so he's not the one who proved it. So it follows similar to Penrose, that you actually add those units based on matching rules. You come up, you can map or tile the space infinitely. In this case, this is the pattern we're going to use, and this is just a representation of a diffraction pattern of octagonal quasi-crystals. So it's exactly click. Now we start with a basic grid. In a man, actually, this is the seed unit. It's a very simple one. This is the design of the seed unit, how you come up with a seed unit. This is actually the connecting formation, which is part of the seed unit. Remember, that's the same thing with Penrose. The connecting formation, the formation is part of the seed unit. You put it in place. You come up with this design, very nice, octagons in between, which is the connecting formation. So you come up with the first hierarchy. To build the second hierarchy, you simply build a new generation of that network. And this is basically the new seed. And this is the connecting formation. So if you take that, this is the connecting formation, is still part of the seed unit. So you have to follow that system. And you come up with a second hierarchy. Now to take it to the third hierarchy, of course, you follow the same process. It's just my computer overheats at that point. So. Now, I also work with, you can easily compute that and generate those patterns. I actually work with C++. It's not cheap. You don't have to work with software. You actually can write your own code. These are the mathematics, actually. It's not important. It's very easy mathematics. Just analyzing the grid itself and how it grows hierarchically can easily construct the mathematics of it. Now, if we can use the same grid, why can't we use it to do new quasi-periodic systems? So I used basically manipulation. This is the one we used for basically the tower and Penrose and Dhabi al-Imam. So what I did is only change the design of the seed unit. And remember all of these, that the seed unit, the connecting formation is part of the seed unit. So I basically took those connecting formation from the seed unit. If you put it based on what we did with Penrose, you come up with this formation, use the connective formation, you come up with the first hierarchy. Now you can also use this we call the deflation-inflation rules. You can extract those from the pattern and use it to prove that this is actually can be used for Penrose. This is the other Penrose. Penrose actually got two two tiling system. This click exactly with Penrose.
There was more than two.
Sorry?
There was more than two.
Okay.
There was 7 Penrose tilings.
Okay, the famous one then.
The two are,
talk about that.
the two of them are the popular ones.
Okay, the popular one.
So there are only 2 that have 5-foot.
Yeah, 5-fold symmetry.
That's only.
They didn't just speak to the microphone because of the simultaneous.
Yeah, we're working with the Penrose 5-fold. Okay. I mean, I haven't seen them, so. Okay, so to basically build the second hierarchy, you follow the exact rules, you come up with it. It's just interesting, I've just colored this, the blue lines, actually all of them have the same distance between each other. So it's interesting, it's where would the atoms be? Because now the question in the chemistry and the physics society, where would the atom be? Because you have to have it very ordered. So now what's next? Actually, I'm working 12-fold, and hopefully working with Emil Makovicki and working with 12-fold, but this is following the same rules. You can actually start building a new form. I haven't seen any 12-fold tiling, have you? So this is basically, we're gonna publish it hopefully soon. And next is working with basically 3-dimensional dimension with those patterns. See the potential in architecture and design, even in muqarnas, and hopefully it will be, interesting. And that's it. Thank you. Perfect.